Avoidants don't chase love, they chase what they might lose. Avoidants don't respond to closeness the way most people do. Closeness actually threatens them. But losing you, that's the one thing that gets their attention. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop feeding the connection with your reassurance, your effort, your emotional presence, their entire internal system begins to panic. They're used to you being the steady one, the predictable one, the safe emotional anchor they can distance from without ever risking the relationship. But your indifference breaks that pattern instantly. It removes the control they relied on. It erases the predictability they used as emotional protection. Suddenly, the person who felt too close now feels too far, and that distance feels dangerous to them in a way they never expected. Avoidants don't consciously think, I'm losing them. Instead, something deeper kicks in, a survival response. They start hyper-focusing on you, checking your energy, your absence, your silence. They notice the shift before you ever say a word. Your indifference creates a void, and avoidants notice voids more than they notice affection. Your silence triggers the very attachment, fear they've spent their life trying to outrun, the fear of abandonment. Yes, even though they often do the distancing, yes, even though they pull back first, even though they act cold, losing you terrifies them. Your emotional retreat feels different from their emotional retreat. When they pull away, they feel in control. But when you do it, it feels like rejection. It feels like the emotional ground under them just moved. And because they don't know how to process closeness, they definitely don't know how to process the threat of losing it. The same indifference that looks calm to you feels catastrophic to them. This is why avoidants suddenly reappear, check in, or start watching you from the shadows when you stop caring. They're not chasing love. Love feels overwhelming. They're chasing the sense of security they assumed they'd always have with you. They chase the possibility that they miscalculated, that they pushed you too far, the connection they took for granted isn't waiting for them anymore. Your indifference forces them to experience the one emotion they avoid at all costs, vulnerability. And here's the twist. Your silence is louder than any message you ever sent. Your calm, your neutrality, your lack of reaction penetrates their defenses far more than your affection ever did. They can dismiss your closeness. They can minimize your emotions, but they can't ignore your absence. Because for avoidance, losing someone who cared deeply about them isn't just painful, it's destabilizing. And that's the moment their avoidance strategy starts to crack. Not when you try harder, but when you finally stop trying at all. Your indifference feels like abandonment, even if they pushed you away. Avoidants spend their entire lives trying to protect themselves from emotional pain. They avoid closeness not because they don't care, but because closeness feels risky, unpredictable, overwhelming, and out of their control. So they create distance. They pull back. They shut down. They convince themselves that staying emotionally distant keeps them safe. But here's the paradox. The moment you step back first, everything they thought would protect them suddenly starts to hurt them instead. When you become indifferent, you flip their entire emotional script. The dynamic they depended on, where they control the closeness and you maintain the connection, instantly collapses. They're no longer the one choosing distance. They're the one experiencing it. And that tiny shift in energy hits them harder than you'd ever imagine. Avoidants anticipate your love, your patience, your effort, but they never prepare for your silence. They never prepare for the moment you stop trying. And when that moment arrives, it doesn't feel like space. It feels like abandonment. Even if they were the ones who withdrew first, your indifference hits a very old wound within them. The childhood wound of emotional disconnection, unpredictability, or feeling unseen. The same wound that created their avoidant patterns to begin with. Now they feel the distance. They feel the disconnect they thought they wanted. And for the first time, they're forced to sit inside the emptiness their coping mechanism creates. It's uncomfortable. It's foreign. It's frightening. The fear they spent years avoiding, the fear of truly losing someone who mattered, suddenly comes crashing back into their awareness. Your indifference removes the illusion that they're in control. They can't tell themselves, I just need space. When you're the one stepping back, they can't soothe themselves with, they'll always be there. when your energy is no longer reaching for them. Instead, they're confronted with a reality they never prepared for, the possibility that you might actually detach permanently. And this is the part that shakes them, because avoidants aren't afraid of intimacy, they're afraid of dependence. They're afraid of investing in someone who could hurt them. They're afraid of caring too much, but when your energy pulls away, they realize they depended on you more than they admitted. They realize the connection mattered more than they showed. They realize their distance didn't protect them. It pushed away the one person who never stopped showing up. Your indifference becomes a mirror, reflecting back the emotional consequences of their own avoidance. It forces them to feel what they've been suppressing. It forces them to face the result of their own pattern. And in that moment, the avoidant, who seemed so detached, so unaffected, so emotional and reachable, finally feels everything they ran from. Not because you punished them, not because you argued, but because you stopped chasing and your silence woke up the fear their distance never could. One of the deepest truths about avoidance is this: they always think you'll still be there. They don't consciously expect you to tolerate the distance, the mixed signals, the emotional shutdowns, but they behave as if you will. They get comfortable with the idea of your loyalty, your consistency, your effort. In their mind, the connection is something they can put down and pick up whenever they feel ready. They assume time won't change your feelings. They assume space won't change the bond. They assume you won't change at all. So when you become indifferent, not angry, not dramatic, not chasing, but genuinely indifferent, it shatters their internal reality. It shocks them. It's the emotional equivalent of pulling the ground from beneath their feet, because they never pictured a version of the story where you stop trying. They only prepared for the version where they need space and you patiently hold the door open for them to come back. To an avoidant, distance is something they create to feel safe, not something they expect to experience from the person who once held them emotionally. When you pull back, it feels unnatural to them. It feels foreign, and it feels like a threat they don't know how to handle. They're used to controlling the pace of the relationship. They're used to deciding when it's too close, when it's too much, when they need room. But your indifference takes away their sense of control. Suddenly, the roles reverse, and they're not ready for that. Your disappearance exposes a truth they've avoided for years. Relationships aren't one-sided. Love doesn't wait forever. People don't stay when they feel neglected, dismissed, or emotionally starved, and they realize this too late. Your indifference isn't a punishment, it's a consequence. It's the natural response to being pushed away one too many times. But to an avoidant who's always relied on your presence, it feels like abandonment. It feels like betrayal. It feels like a loss they didn't see coming. You were the stable one, the warm one, the emotionally giving one, the one they believed would always be there, even if they weren't half as present. So your shift, your calm, quiet detachment hits them harder than any argument ever could. There's no drama to blame, no fight to justify, no emotional explosion to hide behind. It's just silence, a silence they can't control, a silence they can't predict, a silence that forces them to confront how much they actually depended on your emotional availability. And that's the moment the illusion dissolves. The illusion that they could keep you at arm's length and still keep you, the illusion that you'd always wait, the illusion that you needed them more than they needed you. Your indifference proves what they never expected. You were never stuck. You were choosing them. And now, for the first time, they realize you can also choose to walk away. Avoidants pride themselves on control, emotional control, situational control, and especially control over the pace and depth of connection. They pull back when things feel too close. They shut down when emotions run high. They withdraw when they sense expectation. And for a long time, this strategy works. They can regulate the relationship by regulating their own availability. They can manage your reactions by staying just close enough to keep the bond alive, but distant enough to feel safe. But there's one thing they can't prepare for, predict, or influence: your indifference. Indifference is the one energy they can't manipulate, the one response they never planned for, the one shift they have no strategy to counter. Because while they know how to navigate your hurt, your disappointment, your hope, and even your pursuit, they have no idea how to navigate your neutrality. Your emotional neutrality disarms them completely. It strips away their usual defenses and leaves them without a familiar script to follow. Avoidants are used to two roles, distancing and being distanced from. Either they take space to protect themselves, or someone becomes too emotional and they retreat. Those two dynamics are predictable to them, but your indifference creates a third dynamic, one they never rehearsed. You're not chasing, you're not begging, you're not over explaining, you're not trying to fix anything. You're simply detached, calm, unbothered. And that calmness is more threatening to an avoidant than any argument could ever be. They can manage your tears. They can manage your questions. They can even manage your frustration because those reactions still show you're emotionally involved. But indifference means you're no longer invested. You're no longer emotionally reactive. You're no longer giving them the reassurance they subconsciously relied on. And that terrifies them, even if they don't show it. Your disengagement is the one thing they can't reinterpret or minimize. They can convince themselves you're emotional because you care. They can convince themselves you're angry because the connection matters. But indifference, they can't spin that into a comfortable story. It forces them to confront the reality that the bond they assumed was secure has shifted and not in their favor. For the first time, they're the one reacting while you stay steady. They're the one wondering what you're thinking. They're the one checking your energy, noticing the silence, feeling the gap. Your neutrality destabilizes them because it takes away the emotional advantage they've always held. It shows them they were never actually in control. They just believed they were because you kept the connection alive while they ran from it. And now they're faced with a truth they never wanted to face. They can't control someone who's no longer emotionally invested. They can't influence someone who's no longer available. They can't keep someone who's no longer trying. Your indifference isn't a punishment. It's freedom, yours, and a wake-up call, theirs. Avoidants spend most of their emotional lives outrunning their own feelings. Vulnerability, fear, insecurity, emotional needs, all of it gets pushed down, buried, or dismissed as too much. Their entire attachment strategy is built on avoidance. Avoid closeness, avoid intensity, avoid dependence, avoid anything that might expose how deeply they actually feel. For a long time, this strategy works for them. As long as you are the one maintaining the connection, they can maintain their distance without facing themselves. But everything shifts when you start to pull back. Your pullback corners them emotionally in a way nothing else ever has. It traps them in the very feelings they've spent years trying to escape. Suddenly, there is no one to absorb the emotional weight for them. No one to keep the connection alive while they run from it. No one to reassure them that you'll always be there. Your indifference forces them to sit alone with the consequences of their own avoidance. At first, they don't understand what they're feeling. Avoidants aren't used to labeling emotions, they're used to suppressing them, but the sensations rise anyway. Regret, fear, anxiety, insecurity, longing, confusion. These emotions come in waves and they don't know how to stop them because for the first time, they're not running from closeness. They're running from the loss of it. And that's a feeling that terrifies them far more than intimacy ever did. They start replaying memories they once ignored. They revisit moments where you reached out and they shut down. They question whether they pushed too hard, distanced too much, or underestimated your breaking point. This internal reflection is something avoidants rarely do, but your pullback forces it. It's in the quiet and your absence that their emotional reality becomes undeniable. Your indifference creates an emotional mirror. It reflects back their patterns, their fears, their defenses. It shows them what it actually feels like on the receiving end of their behavior. And this is where the self-awareness begins, not in the moments you tried to explain, not in the conversations where you begged for connection, but in the moment they feel the sting of their own distance. They finally understand that avoidance doesn't protect them. It isolates them. It sabotages their connections. It pushes away the very people who care the most, but they only learn this when they experience the emptiness they once created for others. And that emptiness aches in a way they weren't ready for. Regret becomes the first emotion they can't suppress. Fear becomes the second. The fear that maybe they pushed you too far. The fear that you might not return. The fear that they misread your love as permanence instead of a choice. Your pullback doesn't just affect them, it awakens them. It cracks the emotional armor they've worn for years. It forces them to feel what they never wanted to face. And without even trying, you become the catalyst for their first real moment of self awareness. Avoidants spend most of a relationship believing they control the emotional distance. They decide when things get too close. They decide when to withdraw. They decide when to reappear. To them, regulating intimacy is how they regulate safety. It's how they protect themselves from the vulnerability they were never taught to handle. And because you've always been the one holding the emotional weight, reaching out, reassuring, staying consistent, they became accustomed to holding all the power in the connection without even recognizing it as power. But everything changes the moment you detach. Your indifference flips the entire attachment polarity. Suddenly, they're not the one stepping back. They're the one watching you step away. And that shift hits them on a level deeper than logic. It hits their core fear. For the first time, they're not in control of the pace. They're not in control of the closeness. They're not in control of whether the connection continues. And losing that control is more destabilizing to an avoidant than closeness ever was. Your pullback terrifies them because it exposes something they never wanted to see. They were never as detached as they pretended. They relied on your pursuit, your reassurance, your emotional presence far more than they admitted, even to themselves. And now, without that energy anchoring them, they feel disoriented, anxious, unsure of what comes next. Avoidants always believed they could choose when they needed space, but they never considered that you could choose space too. They assumed distance was their decision, their domain, their coping mechanism. But your silence proves that distance isn't something they own, it's something you can create as well. And unlike their distance, your distance isn't predictable. It isn't temporary. It isn't based on overwhelm. It's based on a shift in your emotional investment. That's what scares them most. Your distance isn't reactive. It's intentional. It signals change, a kind of change they can't reverse with a breadcrumb or a half-hearted check-in. They can feel the power dynamic tilting away from them. You were once the emotionally available one, but now they feel exposed. You were once the one trying to get closer, but now they're trying to figure out how to re-engage. You were once the one waiting, and now they're the one waiting for a response, a sign, anything that confirms they haven't lost you completely. Watching you walk away, or even sensing that you could, strikes at the heart of their greatest fear, being unprepared, unprotected, and emotionally alone. Avoidants never fear intimacy as much as they fear loss, and your withdrawal forces them into the very position they tried to avoid their entire life. This shift doesn't just unsettle them, it awakens them. It shows them that the emotional balance they once relied on is gone, and for the first time, they realize something they never considered. They might lose someone who never tried to control them, simply because they tried too hard to control the connection. Avoidants spend so much time believing they understand the dynamic of the relationship. They think they know you, your patterns, your limits, your responses. They count on your patience, your consistency, your emotional reliability. They assume that no matter how far they pull away, no matter how cold or distant they become, you'll eventually come closer again, not because you're weak, but because you care. And avoidants misinterpret caring as permanent. But the moment you stop chasing, truly stop, something inside them cracks. Your silence becomes a disruption in their emotional system. Your indifference becomes a mirror they never expected to look into. And suddenly, the person who once felt predictable now feels like a mystery. This is where the internal questioning begins. Did I misjudge them? Avoidants rarely believe someone like you will leave. They see your empathy, your emotional openness, your willingness to try, and they label it as something fixed, something they can depend on. But when your energy changes, they realize they never understood you as deeply as they assumed. Your shift forces them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about you. Did I push too far? Avoidants don't usually reflect on their behavior while they're actively distancing. Emotional self-awareness isn't their first instinct, but your withdrawal forces them to retrace their steps. They start replaying the moments they shut down, the times they dismissed your feelings, the conversations they avoided, the opportunities for connection they rejected, and for the first time, they wonder if they took your love for granted. Am I losing someone irreplaceable? Avoidants often don't realize how deeply attached they are until the attachment is threatened. They convince themselves they don't need closeness, that independence is safer, that emotional distance is protection. But when your energy shifts, they're confronted with the possibility of losing someone who made them feel understood, accepted, grounded. The loss of you doesn't feel replaceable. It feels like a fracture. Your indifference awakens questions they've avoided their entire lives, questions about their behavior, their emotional patterns, their fear of intimacy, their fear of loss, their inability to stay present in love even when they wanted to. Avoidants fear closeness, but they fear abandonment more even if they hide it under logic, excuses, or silence. When you stop chasing, you strip away their emotional shield. They can't blame you for being too emotional or too attached because they can't claim they need space because you've already given it. They can't say you're overwhelming them because you've become calm, neutral, distant. Your indifference forces them inward, into doubt, into reflection, into awareness. And awareness is the one place avoidance never like to go because it means confronting the very patterns they built their emotional survival around. When you stop chasing, they start questioning everything, not because you changed, but because they never believed you could. Avoidants might ignore words, minimize conversations, and shut down when emotions rise, but they never ignore energy. Energy is the one language they feel before they consciously understand. And when your energy shifts from longing to neutrality, from trying to detach calmness, it hits them in a way nothing else ever has. Avoidants don't respond to pressure, persuasion, or emotional intensity, but they always feel the difference when you stop waiting, stop pushing, stop hoping, and simply let go. Your emotional detachment creates a ripple inside them that they can't explain logically. They might not show it externally. Avoidants rarely do, but internally, they feel the shift like a sudden drop in temperature, the warmth they were used to. Gone. The emotional cushion they took for granted. Silent. The reassurance they subconsciously relied on, no longer present. And without your emotional energy holding them, they feel the absence immediately, even before they admit it to themselves. Your new calmness becomes magnetic, not because you're playing a game, but because you've stepped into a version of yourself that is no longer defined by their uncertainty. You're not trying to convince them, you're not trying to fix them, you're not trying to earn their affection. You're just existing in your own freedom. That calm, unbothered energy is something they're not used to encountering. It challenges their assumptions. It disrupts their expectations. It forces them to see you through a new lens, someone strong, self-contained, emotionally sovereign. To an avoidant, calm energy isn't just attractive. It's destabilizing. It signals that you're no longer emotionally anchored to them, no longer waiting for them to choose you, no longer stuck in the cycle of pursuit and retreat. Your neutrality breaks their internal script, the pattern they depended on, where they could pull back and you'd move closer, no longer exists. And when a pattern breaks, avoidants start paying attention. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. When you were trying, they felt overwhelmed. When you were emotional, they felt threatened. When you were available, they felt pressured. But your absence, that's the one thing they can't block out. Silence echoes and avoidance. Distance reverberates. They feel the weight of what's missing more intensely than the weight of what was offered. They start to notice what's not there. No more good morning messages. No more emotional warmth. No more checking in. No more reaching out. No more are you okay. The space you leave behind becomes the first space they can't control. And the first space that makes them reflect your lack of reaction forces them into awareness. Your calm energy pulls them into accountability, and your absence becomes the one thing they can't detach from because it symbolizes something they never prepared for, the possibility that they might have actually lost you. Avoidants don't respond to words. They respond to energy. And when your energy stops chasing, that's when theirs finally wakes up. Indifference is the one thing that makes an avoidant reconsider their entire strategy. Avoidants live by control. They regulate distance, intimacy, and emotional availability to keep themselves safe. They pull back when things feel too close, withdraw when emotions get intense, and create space whenever they sense dependency. For years, they rely on the predictable response of the person they care about, knowing that no matter how distant they act, the other will stay. They count on patience, forgiveness, and emotional labor to maintain the connection without having to fully engage themselves. This has been their strategy for navigating relationships, and it usually works until it doesn't. Your indifference is the one thing that disrupts that strategy entirely. It's not what you say. It's not how you confront them. It's not even the boundaries you set. It's the simple fact that you stop needing them the way they expected. Your lack of need, your calm, unreactive energy forces them to pause and reflect. Suddenly, they're confronted with the reality they never prepared for. Their usual tactics no longer guarantee the outcome they've relied on. Their predictability, their manipulation, their avoidance, all of it is exposed. Indifference creates a mirror. Avoidants are forced to see themselves as they are, not as they imagine themselves, and not as they want others to see them. They start asking questions they've long avoided. How did I push them away? Did I take them for granted? Did I misjudge how much they truly cared? These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge the carefully constructed narrative they've relied on for emotional safety. And unlike words or confrontations, your indifference cannot be argued with or minimized. It exists quietly, powerfully, and without drama, making it impossible for them to ignore. The more you step back, the more they notice the consequences of their actions. Every absence of attention, every lack of reaction, every unreturned effort begins to accumulate in their mind. They realize that they cannot control your feelings anymore, that their avoidance has real tangible effects, and that the person they assumed would always be there may not be there forever. This realization is destabilizing for an avoidant, not because they fear love, but because they fear losing it. And your indifference amplifies that fear in a way that closeness, confrontation, or pleading never. Indifference forces self-reflection. It forces accountability. It forces them to confront their patterns and ask themselves why they behaved the way they did. And in that reflection, something shifts. They begin to see that avoidance is no longer a safe strategy, that emotional distance has consequences, and that they can no longer take your presence for granted. Your silence, your calm, your lack of need, it's the most powerful feedback you can give an avoidant. It doesn't lecture, it doesn't shame, and it doesn't demand change. Instead, it forces them to reconsider their entire approach to relationship. And for the first time, they see that the very strategy that once protected them may have also cost them the one person who truly mattered. The moment you stop caring is the moment they start waking up. Avoidants have spent their lives avoiding the very emotions that your love brings to the surface. They avoid vulnerability, they avoid dependence, and they avoid the kind of closeness that demands honesty and presence. Their entire strategy revolves around creating space, controlling distance, and managing emotional risk. And for years, your care, your attention, and your patience have been the safety net that allowed them to maintain this pattern without facing the consequences. They could be distant, detached, or even hurtful, and you would absorb it. You would reassure. You would forgive. You would stay. But the moment you stop caring, the moment your energy shifts from pursuit to neutrality, from attachment to emotional independence, everything changes. Your indifference removes the comfort they relied on. The invisible safety net they assumed would always be there is gone. No more reassurance. No more emotional scaffolding. No more predictable reactions to their distance. Suddenly, they're forced to face the reality they spent so long avoiding. That you might actually step away. That your love isn't infinite and that they can't control the outcome anymore. Your indifference removes their excuses. They can no longer justify their behavior with, I just need space, or I'm not ready. They can't rely on your constant availability to validate their emotional detachment. Every pattern they use to hide behind becomes exposed. Their emotional immaturity, their avoidance, and the fear they've buried deep inside, all of it comes to the surface. And for the first time, they feel the weight of their actions, the consequences of their distance, and the reality of what losing you might mean. It forces them to confront everything they avoided, their fear of intimacy, their inability to express love consistently, their patterns of emotional withdrawal. It forces them to see themselves as they are, not as they wish to be seen. And this confrontation is uncomfortable, destabilizing, and unavoidable. They can no longer escape by controlling the distance, because the distance now exists in your presence, in your energy, in your choice to detach. And that's when the shift happens. Not externally, not through arguments or confrontations, not through attempts to manipulate or plead. The shift is internal, deep, and painful. They start waking up to the reality of their avoidance, to the depth of your love, and to the preciousness of the person they risked losing. They begin to realize that losing you isn't just a threat, it's a consequence. And in that painful awakening, awareness replaces denial. Regret replaces indifference. And for the first time, they might start asking themselves what it would take to deserve the connection they almost lost. Your silence, your detachment, and your refusal to chase don't destroy them. They reveal them. They force self-reflection. They awaken emotional accountability. And in that space, the avoidant who once seemed unreachable begins to face the very patterns they'd built to protect themselves and the very love they almost let slip away. The moment you stop caring is the moment they start truly waking up.